In this video, we are talking about the Mississippian Moundbuilders, who flourished in the Midwestern, Eastern, and Southeastern United States from approximately 800 to 1600 CE. They are best known for constructing large, complex earthen mounds for religious, ceremonial, and residential purposes. In the quiet fields of southern Illinois, beneath a canopy of oaks and maples, a great shape rises from the ground. It is not a hill formed by nature. It is not a mountain carved by time. It is a mound. A massive, flat-topped pyramid of earth built by human hands over 700 years ago. It stands more than 100 feet tall. Its base covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. From its summit, the ancient builders could see rivers, forests, and distant villages. This is Monk's Mound, the heart of Cahokia, the largest city north of Mexico before European arrival. And it was not alone. Across the American Midwest and Southeast, from Oklahoma to Florida, from the Mississippi River to the Atlantic coast, more than 1,000 such mounds were built. They rose in clusters, arranged in patterns, grouped around open plazas. They supported temples, homes of chiefs, and burial chambers. They were not tombs like those of Egypt. They were living symbols of power, religion, and unity. These mounds were built by a people now known as the Mississippian Moundbuilders. They left no written records. They did not speak to us in letters or books, but they spoke through the land. They shaped the earth into monuments that still stand today. Their world lasted for over 500 years. At its height, their culture stretched across much of eastern North America. They grew corn, traded across vast distances, and lived in cities larger than most European towns of the same time. Then, within a few generations, their great centers were abandoned. The fires went out. The plazas emptied. The mounds stood silent. No war, no plague, no single disaster erased them. They simply faded, like a long summer turning into autumn. This is the story of a civilization that once thrived in the heart of North America, a civilization built not on stone or steel, but on soil, corn, and belief. This is the story of the Mississippian Moundbuilders. To understand the rise of the Mississippian culture, we must go back, long before the first mound was raised. We must go to a time when people lived differently, a time when no cities stood, no temples rose, no chief ruled from a platform of earth. For thousands of years, the people of eastern North America lived as hunters and gatherers. They moved with the seasons. They followed deer and elk. They fished in rivers. They gathered nuts, berries, and roots. They lived in small bands, rarely staying in one place for long. Their tools were made of stone, bone, and wood. They built shelters from bark and branches. Life was shaped by nature, not by human design. Around 1000 BCE, a change began. It started slowly. People began to grow plants, not just gather them. They planted seeds. They tended crops. This was the beginning of agriculture. One plant changed everything. Maize. Maize, what we now call corn, originated in Mexico. It was domesticated from a wild grass called teosinte. It did not grow wild in North America. It had to be brought north, over generations, by people passing seeds from hand to hand, village to village. By 200 BCE, maize had reached the lower Mississippi Valley, but it was not yet a staple. It grew slowly. It needed rich soil and warm weather. Early forms of corn were small and not very productive. Still, people planted it. Over time, they learned how to grow it better. They selected seeds from the best plants. They cleared land. They used fire to enrich the soil. They mixed maize with beans and squash, the three sisters, which grew well together. Maize provided grain. Beans climbed the stalks and added nitrogen to the soil. Squash spread on the ground, blocking weeds. This farming system worked. It produced more food than hunting and gathering. More food meant more people could live in one place. Villages grew larger. People stayed in one spot for longer. Permanent homes were built. Storage pits were dug. Society began to change. By 200 CE, a new cultural phase emerged, the woodland period. This was not yet the Mississippian world, but it laid the foundation.
Woodland people lived in settled villages. They made pottery. They built burial mounds. These early mounds were small. They were often conical, round and dome-shaped. They covered the graves of important people. Grave goods, such as shell beads, copper ornaments, and engraved stones, were placed with the dead. These items showed status. They showed belief in an afterlife.
One of the most famous woodland mound sites is Hopewell, centered in southern Ohio between 200 BCE and 500 CE. The Hopewell people did not live in cities, but they built enormous earthworks, geometric enclosures, circles, and squares, some more than a mile across. They used these spaces for ceremonies, gatherings, and burials. They traded materials from across North America, obsidian from Wyoming, copper from Lake Superior, mica from the Carolinas, shells from the Gulf Coast. The Hopewell were not a single nation. They were a network of related cultures connected by trade and ritual. They did not build large platform mounds, but they showed that people in eastern North America could organize labor, share beliefs, and create large-scale earthworks. By 500 CE, the Hopewell culture declined. The reasons are unclear. Climate shifts may have played a role. Trade routes may have broken down. Social structures may have weakened. But the idea of mound building did not die. It evolved. And from this evolution, a new world would rise. Around 800 CE, a transformation began. It did not happen all at once. It did not sweep across the land like a storm. It grew slowly, like a plant breaking through soil. But by 1000 CE, something new had taken root. This was the beginning of the Mississippian culture, a widespread and enduring way of life that would shape much of eastern North America for the next 6 centuries. The term Mississippian does not refer to the modern state of Mississippi. It refers to the Mississippi River Valley, the heartland where this culture first emerged and from which it spread outward in waves of influence. The river was not just a source of water. It was a highway. It connected distant regions. It carried food, goods, and ideas. It allowed people to travel, trade, and communicate. Along its banks and those of its major tributaries, the Ohio, the Tennessee, the Cumberland, the Arkansas, towns and ceremonial centers began to grow in size and complexity. The Mississippian people were not a single tribe or nation. They spoke different languages. They lived in different regions. They had their own leaders and customs. Yet they shared a common way of life. They all relied on maize agriculture as the foundation of their economy. They all built earthen mounds as central features of their towns. They all lived in hierarchical societies where power was concentrated in the hands of a few. And they all followed a complex religious system that linked the natural world to the spiritual realm. At the core of this cultural shift was corn, maize. But this was not the wild grass of ancient Mexico. By 800 CE, after centuries of careful selection and cultivation, farmers in the eastern United States were growing a new kind of maize. It had larger ears, more kernels, and a shorter growing season. It was better adapted to the temperate climate of the Midwest and Southeast. This improved variety, known to archaeologists as Eastern complex maize, matured faster and produced more food per plant than earlier forms. This change was revolutionary. For the first time, people could grow enough food to support large, permanent populations. Surpluses could be stored for lean times. Not everyone needed to farm full-time. Some could specialize, become potters, tool makers, traders, or religious leaders. This allowed for social complexity. It allowed for leadership.
More food meant more people. Villages that once held a few dozen people now grew to hundreds. Some grew to thousands. These settlements were not scattered. They were organized. Houses were arranged in rows. Paths connected neighborhoods. Open plazas were cleared in the center. And rising above it all were the mounds. But this was not just any mound. The Mississippian people built platform mounds, large, flat-topped pyramids made entirely of earth. These were fundamentally different from the burial mounds of earlier periods, such as those built during the Woodland period, 1000 BCE to 800 BCE. While earlier mounds were often conical and used primarily for burying the dead, Mississippian platform mounds were architectural foundations. They were built to support structures, temples, council houses, and the homes of chiefs.
The construction of these mounds was a massive undertaking. Workers dug soil from nearby borrow pits, depressions in the ground that still exist today around many mound sites. They carried the earth in baskets made of woven river cane or plant fibers. Each basket held about 40 to 50 pounds of soil. Workers formed lines or moved in processions, passing baskets hand to hand or carrying them on their backs. The soil was dumped in layers, each one carefully packed down. Wooden stakes marked the edges. Ramps made of wood and earth allowed workers to reach higher levels as the mound grew. Over time, the mounds rose 10 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet into the air. The largest would take decades to complete. The labor required was immense. It could not be done without coordination. It could not be done without authority.
This meant that Mississippian societies were not egalitarian. They were chiefdoms, political systems in which a single leader or paramount chief ruled over a central town and a network of smaller villages. The chief's power was inherited, usually passed from father to son or through a matrilineal line. He was not a king in the European sense. He did not rule by law or bureaucracy. He ruled by charisma, kinship, and sacred authority. The chief was more than a political leader. He was a religious figure, believed to stand between the world of humans and the world of the spirits. He was responsible for maintaining balance in the cosmos. If the crops failed, if the rains did not come, if enemies attacked, it was the chief's duty to restore order through ritual. He performed ceremonies at key times of the year, planting, harvest, solstice. He offered sacrifices. He consulted with priests and elders. His home on the mound was not just a residence, it was a symbol of power. By living above the people, both physically and spiritually, the chief demonstrated his elevated status. The higher the mound, the greater the chief's authority. Other mounds in the town supported temples where priests conducted rituals or council houses where leaders met to make decisions. The construction of the mounds was not just labor, it was ritual. Building a mound was an act of devotion. It showed the people's commitment to the chief, to the gods, and to the social order. When a worker carried a basket of earth, he was not just moving dirt, he was participating in a sacred project. He was helping to create a place where the sky and the earth met. He was reinforcing the structure of the world. This belief system helped maintain stability. It justified the differences between rich and poor, elite and commoner. It gave meaning to work. It created unity. In a world without writing, without coins, without formal laws, shared belief was the glue that held society together. Archaeological evidence confirms this social hierarchy. At major sites like Cahokia, Moundville, and Etowah, the largest mounds are located in the center of the town, near the main plaza. Burials beneath or near these mounds contain far more grave goods than those in common areas. These include copper plates, marine shell beads, polished stone axes, and elaborately engraved pottery. Some individuals were buried with dozens of shell beads, each one painstakingly drilled by hand. Others were laid to rest with ceremonial maces made of stone, symbols of authority. In contrast, people buried in smaller mounds or in residential areas had few or no grave goods. Their lives were different. They farmed, hunted, and gathered. They built homes and carried baskets of earth. They lived in wattle and daub houses, frames of wooden poles woven with branches and covered in clay. These homes were clustered around the edges of the town, away from the sacred center. The economy was based on agriculture, but it was not isolated. The Mississippian people were part of a vast trade network that stretched across North America. From the Great Lakes came copper, hammered into ornaments and ritual objects. From the Appalachian Mountains came mica, used to make shiny inlays. From the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Ocean came marine shells, turned into beads, cups, and gorgets, chest ornaments. From the Ohio Valley came flint for tools and weapons. From the Rocky Mountains came obsidian, a volcanic glass used for sharp blades. These materials were not just practical, they were symbols of status. A chief wearing a copper headdress or a shell-beaded cloak was displaying his reach, his power, and his connection to distant lands. Trade was not just about goods, it was about alliance, diplomacy, and prestige. Religion was deeply tied to the natural world. The Mississippian people believed in a three-tiered universe: the upper world, the earthly world, and the underworld. The upper world was the realm of the sun, the stars, and celestial beings. The earthly world was where humans lived. The underworld was a place of darkness, water, and serpents. The chief and the priests were seen as mediators between these worlds. One of the most important symbols was the sun. It represented life, power, and renewal. Many mounds were aligned with the sunrise on the solstices and equinoxes. At Cahokia, the woodhenge post circles marked these celestial events. On the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun rose directly behind a specific post, signaling the time to plant or begin ceremonies. Another key figure was the birdman, a human with wings or bird-like features. He appeared in art across the Mississippian world. He was often shown holding a mace or a ceremonial object. He may have represented a hero, a warrior, or a spirit who could travel between worlds. At Cahokia, a famous burial known as Mound 72 contained the remains of a man laid on a platform of 20,000 shell beads shaped like a bird. He wore a headdress and was surrounded by sacrificial victims. This suggests he was a ruler of great importance, possibly a paramount chief. The southeastern ceremonial complex, also known as the Southern Cult, was the artistic and religious expression of this shared belief system. It included standardized symbols, rituals, and objects that appeared at sites from Oklahoma to Florida. Common motifs included the cross and circle, representing the four directions or the sun, the hand and eye, symbolizing divine power or watchfulness, the falcon or eagle, the serpent, and the axis mundi, a central pole or tree connecting the heavens, earth, and underworld.
These symbols were not random. They told stories. They conveyed religious ideas. They reinforced the chief's authority. A copper plate showing a warrior in a feathered headdress was not just art. It was a statement of power. Warfare played a role in this world. Many towns were surrounded by palisades, walls made of tall wooden posts. At Cahokia, the palisade was rebuilt several times, indicating ongoing concerns about defense. Arrowheads embedded in human bones show that violence was real. Captives may have been taken in raids and later sacrificed in rituals. But war was not constant. It was likely ritualized, used to gain prestige, capture prisoners, or settle disputes between chiefdoms. Success in war enhanced a chief's status. It proved his strength and divine favor. Despite their differences in language and location, Mississippian communities shared enough in common to form a cultural sphere. They recognized each other's symbols, they traded, they may have sent emissaries. They likely shared myths and ceremonies. They were not a single empire, but they were part of a connected world. By 1000 CE, this world was fully formed. The mounds rose, the plazas filled with people, the fires burned on the temple summits. The chief stood above the crowd, speaking to the gods. The Mississippian era had begun. Cahokia was not built in a day. It did not rise suddenly. It grew over time, like a tree adding rings. The site is located near present-day Collinsville, Illinois, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. It sits on a floodplain near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers. This location was ideal. Rivers provided water, transportation, and fish. The soil was rich. The land was flat, perfect for building. People had lived in the area for centuries, but around 900 CE, something changed. Villages began to grow. More people arrived. More houses were built. Then, around 1050 CE, Cahokia exploded in size and complexity. This period, 1050 to 1200 CE, is known as Cahokia's Big Bang. In just a few decades, it became the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. At its peak, Cahokia covered nearly 6 square miles. It had a population of between 10,000 and 20,000 people, possibly more. To put this in perspective, London and Paris had similar populations at the time. It was a true urban center. The city was carefully planned. At its center was a large, open plaza, about 40 acres in size. This plaza was kept clear of homes. It was a space for gatherings, ceremonies, games, and markets. Around the plaza stood more than 120 mounds. The largest, Monk's Mound, dominated the skyline. Monk's Mound is a marvel of engineering. It rises 100 feet high. Its base covers 14 acres, larger than a football field. It has 4 terraces, each one smaller than the one below. At the top once stood a large building, likely a temple or the chief's residence. To build Monk's Mound, workers moved an estimated 22 million baskets of earth. Each basket held 50 pounds. That is over 550 million pounds of soil. The earth was dug from nearby pits, carried in baskets, and dumped layer by layer. Workers used wooden ramps to reach higher levels as the mound grew. The entire process likely took decades. Other mounds surrounded the plaza. Some were smaller platform mounds, some were burial mounds. One, known as Mound 72, contained the remains of more than 250 people. Some were buried in mass graves. Some were laid out in patterns, such as a group of 53 young women, all neatly arranged. Some high-status men were buried on beds of shell beads. One man, known as the Birdman, was laid on a platform of 20,000 shell beads shaped like a bird. He wore a headdress and held ceremonial objects. These burials show that Cahokia had a rigid social hierarchy. The elite were treated with great honor. Some were buried with servants or captives, suggesting ritual sacrifice. But Cahokia was not just a religious center. It was a political and economic hub. Goods from across North America have been found there. Copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from Wyoming. These items were not just traded, they were crafted into jewelry, tools, and ceremonial objects. Artisans lived and worked in Cahokia. They made pottery, engraved shell gorgets, and hammered copper into plates depicting mythological scenes. These objects were part of a widespread artistic tradition known as the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex, or SECC. The SECC linked Mississippian centers across the region through shared symbols: the cross and circle, representing the sun or the 4 directions, the hand and eye, symbolizing divine power,
and the Birdman, a hero figure who could travel between worlds. One of the most fascinating features of Cahokia is Woodhenge, a series of large wooden post circles. These were not temples, they were solar calendars. The posts were aligned with the sunrise on the solstices and equinoxes. On the summer solstice, the sun rose directly behind a specific post, marking the longest day of the year. This helped the people time their planting and ceremonies.
Cahokia was also defended. A large wooden palisade surrounded the central area. It was built and rebuilt several times. The wall had watchtowers and bastions, showing that defense was important. But it may have also served as a symbolic boundary, separating the sacred city from the outside world. Life in Cahokia was not all ceremony and labor. Most people were farmers. They lived in wattle and daub houses, wood frames covered with mud. They grew corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco. They hunted deer, fished in the rivers, and gathered wild plants. Children played. Families cooked. People told stories. Yet Cahokia was more than a collection of homes. It was a center of power. Chiefs ruled from the mounds. Priests conducted rituals. Traders brought in rare goods. Athletes played chunky, a game where players rolled a stone disc and threw spears toward where it would stop. The game had religious meaning. It was a way to settle disputes, gain status, and connect with the spirit world. Cahokia's influence spread far. Mound centers in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and even Oklahoma show signs of Cahokian style and trade. Some archaeologists believe Cahokia may have sent out colonies or emissaries. Others think its ideas spread through trade and imitation. But by 1200 CE, the tide began to turn. Around 1200 CE, Cahokia started to change. The population began to shrink. New mounds were no longer built. The Grand Plaza was no longer kept clear. Houses were built in sacred spaces. By 1350, the city was abandoned. Why? There was no single cause, but several factors likely combined to bring about Cahokia's fall. Environmental stress. The land around Cahokia was heavily used. Forests were cut for building and fuel. Soil may have lost fertility from constant farming. Erosion increased. Flooding from the Mississippi River became more frequent. A major flood around 1200 may have damaged homes and fields. If the crops failed, the people could not eat. Social unrest. As Cahokia grew, so did inequality. The elite lived on mounds. The common people lived below. If the chief could not deliver good harvests or protection, people might have lost faith. There is evidence of increased violence in later periods. More palisade repairs, more weapons in burials. The system may have become unstable. Climate change. Around 1250 CE, a cooler, drier period began, part of what is called the Little Ice Age. Growing seasons shortened. Corn yields dropped. In a society dependent on maize, this was a serious problem. Trade disruption. If trade routes broke down, the flow of rare goods would stop. Without copper, shells, or mica, the chief's ability to reward followers would weaken. Alliances might collapse. Disease. Though no direct evidence exists, crowded cities are prone to illness. An outbreak of a respiratory disease or parasite could have killed many and forced survivors to leave. Cahokia did not fall in a single event. It faded gradually. People left. They moved to smaller villages. They joined other communities. The city was not destroyed, it was deserted. But the Mississippian way of life did not die.
As Cahokia declined, other mound centers rose. Moundville, in western Alabama, became a major center between 1000 and 1450 CE. It had more than 20 mounds arranged around a central plaza. The largest mound was over 50 feet high. Elite burials included copper ornaments, engraved shell beads, and ceremonial staffs. Moundville may have ruled over a network of smaller villages. Etowah, in northern Georgia, thrived between 1000 and 1550 CE. It had 3 large mounds and a defensive wall. Stone statues of seated chiefs were found there. Burials revealed elaborate regalia, showing a society with deep ritual life. Etowah was likely a regional capital. Spiro, in eastern Oklahoma, became a ceremonial center between 800 and 1450 CE. Though not a large city, it held a vast collection of sacred objects buried in a cave known as Craig Mound. These items, copper plates, shell engravings, and textiles, showed connections to distant regions. Spiro may have been a pilgrimage site. Other centers included Kincaid in southern Illinois, Angel Mounds in Indiana, and Winterville in Mississippi. Each had its own history, leadership, and style, but all shared the core traits of Mississippian culture. These societies were chiefdoms, not kingdoms. Power was not centralized in one ruler. A paramount chief ruled over a region, supported by lesser chiefs in nearby villages. Leadership was often hereditary. Religion and politics were closely linked. Women played important roles. Elite women were buried with rich goods. Some may have held power in their own right. In some Mississippian societies, descent was traced through the mother's line. A chief's sister or daughter might be more important than his son. Art was not decoration, it was communication. Symbols told stories about gods, heroes, and the cosmos. The birdman, the sun, the serpent, and the cross were common motifs. These images appeared on pottery, copper plates, and shell carvings. Music and dance were part of ceremonies. Flutes, drums, and rattles were used in rituals. The green corn ceremony, held in summer, marked the ripening of the crop. It included fasting, dancing, and the renewal of social ties. Old fires were extinguished, new fires were lit. It was a time of forgiveness and fresh beginnings. Warfare existed. Palisades surrounded many towns. Arrowheads found in skeletons show violence. Captives were sometimes sacrificed. But war was not constant. It was likely ritualized, used to gain prestige, capture prisoners, or defend territory. The construction of the mounds was a community effort. It required organization, labor, and belief.
The process was simple but massive. Site selection: a location was chosen near water, farmland, and visible to the people. Soil collection: workers dug earth from pits around the site. These pits later filled with water and became ponds. Transport: soil was carried in baskets made of woven fibers. Workers passed baskets or carried them on their backs. Layering: earth was dumped in layers. Each layer was packed down. Wooden poles marked the edges. Ramping: wooden ramps allowed workers to reach higher levels as the mound grew. Finishing: the mound was covered with clay to protect it from rain. Structures were built on top. No machines, no animals, only human effort. The labor was not slavery. It was likely a form of tribute or religious duty. People may have taken pride in contributing. It was a way to serve the chief and the gods. By 1400, most major Mississippian centers were in decline. Moundville was abandoned. Etowah's population dropped. Spiro's rituals ceased. The reasons were similar to those at Cahokia: environmental strain, social stress, climate change, and shifting trade. But the people did not vanish. They moved. They adapted. They formed new villages. They kept farming. They built smaller mounds. When Europeans arrived in the 1500s, they found the remnants of this world. Hernando de Soto, a Spanish explorer, traveled through the southeast between 1339 and 1543. He met people who lived in towns with mounds. He saw chiefs who ruled with authority. He recorded their customs, food, and weapons. These people, the ancestors of the Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Creek, and others, were the heirs of the Mississippian tradition. But De Soto's journey brought disaster. His men brought disease. They took food. They captured people. The villages they visited suffered. Some collapsed. The arrival of Europeans marked the end of the Mississippian era as it had existed for centuries.